and appropriate regulatory missions can be in tension with each other. If you ask someone, for example, to be both central banker, safety and soundness regulator, and consumer protector, right, you may get none of them done very well. And if you want Exhibit A for that proposition, that is the Federal Reserve Board's failure to use its power to regulate mortgages in the first few years of this decade. Had the power, had the mission, simply didn't do it. Now, some have blamed that on Alan Greenspan's fondness for Ayn Rand. But I don't think that's actually the right way to think about it. I think that it is, you just can't ask anybody to do those three things simultaneously. And if those things aren't being done effectively, you can't do only one of them effectively, right? I believe the Fed thought that consumer protection wasn't important. I'm sure they thought that systemic risk was important. It's turned out that that doing consumer protection well is necessary to protecting against systemic risk. But you probably can't ask the same person to do both at the same time. Secondly, regulating flexibility. I went to business school. I benefited from a number of very smart people's teachings in business school. I went to business school 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. It's unfortunately creeping up on me. It's 15 years ago. I went to business school 15 years ago, and in business school I learned that you could do the very simple act of, for example, investing in the S&P 500 about 20 different ways, right, with different legal documents behind them, but they're economically equivalent. Hopefully we have all learned, because now that the term credit default swap is a household term, that you can similarly do insurance 20 different ways. And only some of those ways are regulated by insurance regulators with capital requirements, and others are just sort of free-form activity. Now this, by the way, some people say, oh, well, this is some brand new thing that just happened, and we're going to have to figure out how in this exotic new world we deal with this circumstance. Absolutely not true. Right? This is why if you open up a law book and look at the Securities Exchange Act of 1933, 1934 and the Securities Act of 1933, you will see that the grant of authority to the SEC is extraordinarily broad and the act is extraordinarily short. Those acts in certain respects resemble the 3 pages that Hank Paulson sent to Congress on TARP. Right? They are a very broad grant of authority to apparently regulate and determine what to do with anything remotely resembling an obligation in any sense of a corporation that is sold to the public. And not just a corporation, a partnership, anything. Security is very broadly defined. And as Bob pointed out, for decades, that kind of authority was sufficient to enable the Securities and Exchange Commission to basically chase anybody who got anywhere near public markets for investment. And then we decided to move in a different place. We need to return to regulatory regimes that allow regulators to follow the money. Now, thirdly, and this is connected to how did we get away from this broad regime and into a regime where we box regulators in? And the paradigm that got us there was the paradigm that regulation is really simply about protecting the naive and the weak. Now, I'm all for protecting the naive and the weak. Whenever I'm in a room full of investment bankers, I feel naive and weak. But that is not the extent of what regulation is about. The notion that we can let the strong and the sophisticated do whatever they want, right, has turned out to be just ruinous. Right? And that doesn't mean that every transaction that occurs between any 2 consenting individuals must be regulated, that the government must always be in the room. But it does mean that anything that has the potential to have broad effect has got to be watched. And that we need to understand the purposes of regulation as being more than, as being this blend of things that I talked about earlier. Right? This blend of transparency, accountability, and sort of managing the fiduciary relationship, capital requirements, risk management, Bob talked about, and some issues of fairness and purpose that I alluded to earlier. Now, finally, and I think I'm running on my time, I'm going to talk a bit about oversight and the Congressional Oversight Panel. We were part of, transparency and so forth is the role of regulation, is the role of oversight and regulation. And as Miles said, I've been honored to be asked to be part of that process with respect to the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act of 2008, which is known to anyone who doesn't live within about 5 miles of here as the financial bailout. We were asked to do 2 things. One is to make inquiries as to what exactly is going on in the TARP and the financial bailout, to make a report every 30 days to Congress. We have the ability to request any document we wish from any government agency we wish to. We can hold hearings. And as I said a moment ago, we have to produce a report on financial regulation. We were asked to do this, and our panel was basically fully formed just before Thanksgiving. We had a report that was already 3 weeks overdue at that point. And we managed to get our first report in 3 weeks after we were impaneled, with Thanksgiving in between. That report consisted of 10 questions, with some sub-questions and some explanatory narrative attached to those questions. Our first report is available on our website, which is www.cop.senate.gov. There's also a very nice video from our chair, Professor Elizabeth Warren from the Harvard Law School. The other panel members, by the way, are Richard Neiman, the banking superintendent of New York State, and then, in a somewhat peculiar development, sitting Congressman Jeb Hensarling, who is a Republican House appointee. Jeb Hensarling is the chair of the House Republican Study Group and a leading opponent of the bailout during the debate. And then we had this unusual set of circumstances in which initially Senator Judd Gregg of New Hampshire was appointed to the panel. He resigned a week later on the basis that he was too busy. And he was replaced, for what I gather is the New Hampshire seat, with retiring Senator John Sununu, who now sits with us. Our 10 questions are pretty simple. They started out with, what is the plan? What is the strategy? And they go through just sort of some basic stuff. What has been done to deal with the mortgage crisis? Has the government been treated fairly in the transactions with the banks? Is the strategy, whatever the strategy is it working? And so forth. There are 10 questions. I'm not going to go through all of them. That gives you a flavor for them.